Our presentation continues in part 3 of our YouTube series. So let's talk about some of the strategies to stay out of trouble. We just looked at what some of the issues are about differences, and then so let's take a look at some specific examples of what some clients have done and see how we can stay out of trouble with these choices. So the number one thing that you can do to stay out of trouble is have access to a trusted web designer. Or if you don't have access to a trusted web designer, have a trusted firm that handles one-off page projects that you can call up and say, hey, we have this project, or can you work on it? Can you help us? Can you look at this? Make sure that you can vet the project before you take a design and make it and say yes to the client. Get the files together, get the general concept together, but before it's finalized and approved by the client, get it off to this trusted web developer or designer and have them look at it. They can flag potential issues before there's an expectation from the client that they'll get this as part of their product. So first thing I want to show you is a page that works. This is a page that we developed a little while ago. And it's a fancy, nice looking page. It's got a gray background. It's got some rounded corners. It has a drop shadow or a darker shadow glow on the outside of it. It has a red banner at the top that reaches all the way across. The center content of the page is a fixed width in this particular design that is centered in the page, even though you don't know how wide it'll be and the red will stretch. Not hard to do though, because it's a consistent repeating pattern on the red that can repeat across the page horizontally. So 2 columns, we've got a simple opt-in form there with the labels actually over the inputs so that when you click on first name, that clears out and you can type. So this is very modern CSS 3 design. It's very light, even though there are nice, good, rich colors and graphics on the page. It's a little hard to see, but there's also grading on this blue on the form. So it's balanced horizontally, vertically. Very balanced, very clean, very easy. So some benefits of doing a page this way: it's a lower production cost. Updates are easier, much easier to do. You don't have a lot of code that's going on here, particularly in the HTML. Most of it's CSS. And it renders better for mobile. This site looks fantastic on a mobile browser, and it's lightweight, so it loads quickly. And because it is CSS and the HTML is very light, it's easy to mobile optimize. So renders better for mobile. If we need to apply some different style sheets or do different things, maybe what we want to do is change the 2 columns of text and make that 1 on a mobile device or something like that. All that stuff is very possible. So renders better. And then the last point here is SEO, which is search engine optimization. This is naturalized search, loves modern design. So when Google sees your page, it sees the code like we showed earlier, those text tags in that HTML and the CSS, and that's what it's reading. It doesn't have a visual gauge engine about how pretty your page is, but it does see your code, and it sees advanced modern code, and it says, these people aren't a corner mom and pop store. They know what they're doing. They've hired a very professional, very cutting edge HTML designer. We're going to give them better search rankings. Absolutely true. Definitely modern, lighter design performs better for SEO every day. So let's talk about some examples of things that are not the best idea. This page isn't honestly all that different from the page that we just looked at. It's kind of the same content. There's some text to the left. There's an opt-in form. There's a header graphic. But it's got some issues with it. So first one is the photo overlays solids. So we were talking about when you have a photo image, you've got to stay square. In this instance, we were able to make this work, and we didn't actually square it off, but this image at the top ended up being huge, very, very big, and that is not good for mobile. It's not good for SEO. It's not good for load times. And that's because the designer took the time to outline this woman and really, how much ROI was granted out of doing that, where that remains to be seen. So the other part of it was we had to make that whole top part into a PNG with a lot of different colors in it that we would rather not have done, and that's what made it so large. And the reason we had to do that is because she overlays into a very solid color there. And JPEGs just can't really fade into a solid color unless you do use a very big PNG file. I'd like to avoid that. So gradients are uneven. I'll zoom in on this, but you can see on the top bar a little bit here that the gradient basically is not a flat gradient. It kind of grows as it goes across the page from right to left and left to right, kind of bows. And that's that bow bottom under the contact form. So these choices cost a lot of time, and they make for a big page, long download, poor SEO. So out of the gate, we might want to think about some different choices. So let's take a look. Shadows and fades, I've got kind of a close-up under the form. The fade under the header has an arc, and it gets thicker as it goes to the right. This would have become a really large image that would have to be placed in a very difficult way with a absolute positioned hovering div that lies in an indexed layer above that, and that's very complicated to do because remember, we're not working with something like InDesign where we just drag this and lay it out. We actually have to mathematically place this thing using calculations with numbers and text code. So it is difficult to do stuff like that. Much easier. Keep it simple. Keep it 1 pixel, 2 pixels, whatever. Keep it just a nice flat fade. It's not that much of a difference. Certainly isn't going to affect ROI. So we keep the drop shadows consistent, and we use the same width across the entire effect. So this can shrink the page by hundreds of kilobytes, and in this particular instance, it knocked probably about an hour and a half of work off, and that's always a good value. So here we're taking a look at the contact form on this page, and the biggest thing here is that there's not uniform object borders. So like we said before, avoid the squiggly lines of the curved edge, and the curved edge on the bottom here is kind of a problem, particularly because it runs into a gradient, and it's not even a solid color that we can kind of put on there as an end cap. The other part of the problem is we're not really sure exactly how wide this form is always going to be. We may want to grow the form in width or shrink it depending on if we're on a mobile device or a narrower screen. So if you have a fixed image that we have to use down there as part of this border, that can be an issue for edits. It can be an issue for different types of rendering on different devices. So rounded edges are okay. And I'll show you an example of what we did for the form. This is what they wanted, and I'll show you what we did. One thing to note about rounded edges is IE, it can't handle rounded corners and gradients together, even in its most current release. But it still looks good. It'll pick one or the other. And then the other part of that is IE8 and IE7 cannot handle the rounded corners. It doesn't have that available at all, whether there's a gradient or not. So here's what we actually did with the form. Actually looks very similar, but this is much easier to make, much easier. So we used rounded corners, and we also did a uniform drop shadow on it, as well as a uniform gradient. Uniform border colors as well. And that really knocked a lot of time off and saved over 200 kilobytes in unnecessary images on the page, and gave us a lot more flexibility in working with the form and sizes on different browsers, particularly the iPhone. And then kind of the last point that I want to make here about this piece is that the images that don't mix well. And so here we have this woman at the top of this page, and we've got a lot of solid colors, like the online campus or hybrid online. Graduate degrees all the same red, and then you've got a solid black, you've got this outer grayish color that's available, and then you've got this red that's a fade in there. So really only a handful of colors, and that's ideal for a PNG, but we've dropped a JPEG over top of it, and because we can't do transparencies, and because the JPEG will not fade to these solid colors or this transparent, this red fade on the bottom, it doesn't work well. So we were able to do this image just as they requested, but it's very expensive. So it's a very, very large image, and that, again, can affect your SEO. And it's always good, if you can avoid it, to not do these types of images. If there's a compelling reason to do so, yes, definitely take a look at it, but otherwise, try to keep it simpler. That pretty much concludes the presentation. I think that's a good wrap-up of things that you can look out for. You want to make sure not to do just while you're going through your high-level design on the web. Just kind of avoid these issues. If you have any questions, or if you'd like a copy of this presentation, please feel free to reach out to us. It's vdpweb.com, and you can always click the contact button there on the page. And then the email address directly is sales@vdpweb.com. And you can also always reach us on the phone at 1-800-735-2578. Again, my name is John Fager, and I'm the founding principal of VDP Web, and I manage the production work, the production and design work there at VDP Web. And it's been a pleasure to present to you today.